This is a story about when I used to live in Thailand. I'm pretty young, and this scared me a lot. It all started when my parents took us for vacation to the beach. They got a pretty cheap hotel about 3 minutes walking distance from the beach. It was near this really busy hotel full of kids, so you would always hear kids shouting all the time. My first night, it was nice, except for when I heard a kid shout and it woke me up. I thought it was from that hotel, but it was 2 o'clock in the morning and they must have been sleeping, and it was a really sharp scream. I got a little scared, but I didn't have the balls to wake up my parents, who were sleeping in the next room. I didn't mind it and went back to sleep. When I woke up, I couldn't find my phone, and the lamp that I had left turned on had turned off by itself. I asked my sister if she had done it, and she said she didn't. I was really skeptical about that. I had some fun times, so I forgot about it. But that night I heard a kid crying, saying, "Don't do it, please." I got the hell out of my room and woke up my sister. She slapped me and told me to go back to sleep, so that's what I did. But on the same night I woke up to what I thought was a shadow of a kid. He kept saying, "Help me, he's coming." At that point, some people might say I was hallucinating, but I wasn't. It was pure reality. Dumb me didn't say anything. The next day, we met a Belgian man that lived next to the hotel. In a sarcastic tone, he said, "So, did you sleep well?" My mom didn't get it, but I did. The last day before we went back, I saw a gardener outside. He was pretty old and I hadn't seen him before, but I didn't think anything of it. After we got back, I spent about 9 hours on the computer trying to research the area, and what I found was terrifying. Where I slept was the house of Thailand's most notorious murderer. What I found was that he was a Chinese man named Si Kuei that had immigrated to Thailand to work as a farmer. He also did some gardening. What they didn't know is that he would also kidnap young children and eat their livers. Now, it all made sense. My class visits this one school a couple of times a week. We go there to do some work and to fix things. There's this one guy that looks exactly like me, but he looks sad and depressed and kind of creepy. Every time I see him, it makes me feel weird and uncomfortable, and I don't know why, but he scares me. This might sound dumb, but today he walked past me and looked me straight in the eyes like he knew something. I'm kind of scared to see him again. So I was 18 years old. It was summer, and I had been enjoying my freedom before college started. It's June 6th of 2018. I remember because it's my grandma's birthday, and it was a Saturday. So the day for the most part was normal, until sundown. I was talking with my mom over trivial things until I heard the living room door click. The walls of the house are fairly thin, so I can hear even the quietest conversations from any room. I know this door specifically because of a certain distinct click that it makes. It's 6 p.m. and I'm excited, thinking, holy shit, my sister's finally home. So I wait for her to come in, until my phone rings. It's my sister, and she answers, "Hey dude, what did you guys eat for dinner today? I'm on my way home from work." I'm a bit weirded out from the sound of the door, but brush it off. I mean, hey, I live across the street from a hospital, so I'm used to seeing, hearing, and feeling things. So hours pass, I get up to shower, and I can hear my mom on the phone with my grandma since it's her birthday, and I decide to move to the living room. But my sister stops me, and she looks a little shaken. She tells me that she had been watching TV for a bit when she decided to talk to my mom. When she's heading over to the room, she hears someone crying. She assumed maybe our grandma died and is preparing to comfort my mom. As she gets closer, the wailing gets louder. When she opens the door, nothing. My mom was laughing and happily discussing events with Grandma. Weirded out, she tells me, and I tell her about the door. I'm Mexican, so ghost stuff is something you grow up hearing, but this stuff sounded kind of like a banshee since she mentioned wailing, but didn't say anything to her at the risk of sounding unhinged. So two things happened, but I guessed again that it was harmless stuff. Mostly denial, I guess. Later, as I was getting ready to sleep, my dad had come home from work about 30 minutes prior. My sister was out with her boyfriend, and my mom was already sleeping in her room. I was lying in bed, and as I read the time, 11:59, a loud pounding went off. I jumped out of bed and ran to the window, thinking someone was knocking on my window, or the door, or a truck hit a pole. Several thoughts ran through my mind. Meanwhile, my mom woke up in a daze. The dogs were going absolutely ballistic, and my dad ran outside with a bat he had. I followed behind him and looked outside. I had a feeling it wasn't an actual person, because it sounded close to thuds, like someone dropping stuff or falling. And the streets are silent. No neighborhood dogs were barking, no cars in sight. For once, in the bad side of town, the streets were dead silent. I looked over to my dad. I had never seen him so terrified in his life. He told me he was watching TV when he heard the thuds, and I brought up the logic. Not to sound like a horror cliche, but because only our dogs heard it, the noises had to have come from inside the house. It was no understatement to say that I didn't get any sleep that night. I was home alone all day the next, but I kept wondering. Those banshee legends kept coming to mind. In a panic, I kept thinking, holy shit, what if someone in the family dies? Of course, everyone in my house brushed it off, despite how shaken we all were. After that, days went by without incident. Sure enough, 2 weeks exactly from that day, and while we're all sitting in the living room watching novellas, my sister pipes up. Hey Mom, what's Jose's daughter's name? Emily, my mom said. She's the middle daughter of 2 other kids. I saw her when she was 3, but that was 10 years ago. I always wanted to have a good relationship with them, but because of a nasty divorce, a feud between families ensued. My sister replied, she's dead. Supposedly, her mother and her children with her new man were driving back into town when the driver did an illegal U-turn and the car flipped, and she died in the hospital later. I don't like jumping to conclusions, but I wonder if it wasn't a banshee, and if they were warning us of this death. Have you ever heard of the Hide Behind? I have, and I'm lucky to be able to tell the tale about my crazy encounter I had one day while I was out in the woods. It was a warm summer morning when I decided that I needed a little fresh air and adventure. I had just left my incredibly stressful job of 6 years as a case manager for the elderly. I packed my bags, broke my lease, broke up with my bum boyfriend, and moved back home with my parents. It was a huge step for me, as I had been out of the house since I was 18. They lived in a really cute part of Maine that was basically in the middle of nowhere. It was perfect, and exactly where I needed to be to figure out my future. I packed my backpack, got in my Jeep, and headed for a local hiking trail. The morning was young and full of potential. I arrived at my destination, grabbed my gear, my map, and headed out. I have never really been a fan of hiking or nature, to be totally honest, but I needed a change. The trail was beautiful, and there was so much to see and explore. Due to being so captivated by nature's beauty, the day had gotten away from me, and before I knew it, it was about 4 in the afternoon. I put my phone on airplane mode so that I wouldn't be bothered while I took some photos and wrote in my journal. I was only seeking peace and quiet. I needed to be alone, and nothing was going to prevent that from happening. I had found a waterfall and a quiet little spring where I decided to go for a dip in the water. I felt a little uncomfortable though, because for some reason It felt as though I was being watched. Occasionally I could hear branches snapping, as if someone, or something, was walking around the perimeter of the spring I had discovered. I was out in nature though, so it could have been anything. I brushed it off. I quickly ate my lunch, and that's when I thought I saw something moving behind the trees. I turned to get a better look, but nothing appeared to be there. I took my phone off of airplane mode, but of course I had no service out here in the middle of nowhere. The weather suddenly changed drastically, as if there were going to be a downpour. There was no one else around, and I began to get very scared, so I headed back to my Jeep. At one point, I stopped walking to catch my breath and take a drink of water. It was then that I heard the trees and bushes rattling. I called out to see if anybody was there, but nobody answered me. I shouted a few more times just to be sure, but the only response was the echo of my own voice. I had this dreadful feeling as though someone was following me, or at least watching me from a distance. I quickened my pace because something was clearly going on, and although I was almost sprinting down the trail, the sounds remained too close behind me. The faster I ran, the faster the sounds appeared to follow. Twigs were snapping and the bushes were swaying back and forth violently. The sounds were so thunderous, as if a whole army was following behind me. These sounds were not only frightening, but it seems to be the only thing I'm able to hear, and they were getting closer. I felt like I was going to vomit or pass out from the adrenaline and fear mixed together. If whatever was following me managed to catch me, I don't know what would have happened, and I wasn't about to become a gone missing poster in the local police department. I quickened my pace to a full sprint until I reached the end of the trail. I felt like I was flying on cloud 9, but I still wasn't fully safe yet. As I reached the Jeep, I saw something in the rearview mirror, standing at the entrance to the trail from where I had just emerged. This thing had to be about 7 feet tall, covered from head to toe in thick snarled hair, 2 large vampire-esque teeth stained with blood, and 2 sinister glowing yellow eyes. I blinked, and suddenly the thing was gone. Back into the woods, I hoped, but I wasn't going to stick around to find out. I hauled ass home and told my folks about what had occurred during my outing. I was so shaken and upset, but my parents didn't seem as surprised or as skeptical as I had expected. They not only believed me, but told me a story about these creatures called the hide-behinds. Apparently, they are creatures that hide behind trees, lurking around the woods hoping to get in reach of unsuspecting prey. The story claimed that if the hide-behind were to catch you, it drags you back to its cave, where it eats you while you're still alive. Later that week, I got my photos printed out, and much to my own horror, in every photo, you could see the same small pair of yellow eyes that I had seen at the trail entrance that day from my Jeep. It appeared to be hiding behind the trees in every photo. The next day I got up, packed my bags, and headed back to Boston. This experience ensured that I will never hike in the woods again. After my little brush with death, I decided I was going back to school for nursing and decided to start a career in the city, far away from the woods and its dark mysteries. So, if you ever need direction in your life, I suggest talking to a counselor or friends, because a hike in the Maine woods could lead to the end of your future endeavors and a full stomach for far more frightening things than an unknown career path. This event goes back a few years to an apartment that I used to live in. It was a house split into 2 apartments, and we lived on the bottom floor. I should note that it was normal for my husband to go upstairs and hang out with the other people for a while, leaving me alone. Plus, the part of the building it took place in couldn't have had anyone walking outside. but I'm getting ahead of myself. While I was in the bathroom, I heard someone walk into the kitchen and start to whistle a tune. I could hear them opening cupboards, and of course I assumed that my husband had come back. The whistling stopped for a few seconds, and then they started the tune again from the beginning. They stopped again, cutting the tune short, and started again after a few seconds. At this point, I noticed that it sounded the same. Not just the same music or the same tune, but like someone had an event on repeat. All the noises were the same. This happened a couple more times, and each time the tune got shorter and shorter, until it was nothing but them repeating the same first note over and over again in fast succession, while getting closer to the bathroom. I looked at the door handle and tried to brace it so nothing could open it. The whistler got faster and faster, and then held the last note at an unhuman pitch that became distorted. The note was held for so long that I thought I'd be trapped in the bathroom until someone came down. And then, silence. I'm not sure how long I paced around the bathroom before I got up the nerve to open that door, but it felt like hours. Whenever I'm by myself and I hear whistling, it makes me freeze in place, and I hope this thing never comes back. My grandfather was nearly 90 years old, and he'd been living in an Alzheimer's and dementia care home for about 6 years. At this point in his life, his memory was very poor. He had memories of his long-distant past, but he couldn't retain anything new. When I visited him, he thought that I was my father, but anything you told him he would forget in about a minute on a good day. He was happy all the time, never sad or angry, just happy. He would love to meet the nurses over and over again. He was just a jolly dude. Now let's skip to my father. He was in a hospice care in my house from a very, very aggressive form of brain cancer. It killed him in 17 days. My house is about 3 hours from my grandfather's care facility, but when my father died on that March day, I got a call from my father's brother, my uncle, who tells me that my grandfather has taken a strange degree of a turn. The nurse that called him was saying that he just kept repeating, "I can't eat. Someone very close to me has died." No one had informed my grandfather that my father had died. No one had gotten the word to him, and he probably wouldn't have retained that information even if they had. Every time they tried to feed him, he said, "I can't eat. Someone very close to me has died." He did this for almost 3 days, and then he started eating again. This is the part that's really striking to me. Like I said, even if you told my late grandfather that his son had just died, he would be instantly very sad, but after a minute, he would be confused as to why he was sad, and then he would snap back to being happy. But for 3 days, he was sad about losing someone, and no one had ever told him. No one had actually seen my grandfather in about 3 weeks. All of his family was close to my house or at my house due to my father being in hospice care. I don't know how to explain it, but it's just one of those things that makes me feel like the universe is far more unknown than we think it is. I don't know if this is strictly paranormal, and it's possible, maybe even probable, that I was dreaming with my eyes open, but it was strange nonetheless. I've had many paranormal experiences, and I've had 2 experiences that I can confidently say were precognition. One that I believe was a precognition that has not yet come to pass. For this experience, I was tired and I was laying on my couch, sort of drifting between being awake and being asleep. My eyes were half open and I got this feeling that I can't put into words. But every time I've had a precognitive event, I've been in this state. As I'm laying on the couch, a woman walks sort of glides into the room quite gracefully. Her face and entire being is kind of unclear, almost like she's blurred out, but I can immediately sense that she's a female. She's wearing a dress that is solid and not solid at the same time. It kind of flows like smoke, and the dress's color shifts between white and black. I can't see her face, but I could sense that if I could, she would have a pale and sorrowful face. She glides over to me and puts one of her hands over my eyes. It isn't cold or warm, but comforting. Then she leaned down and whispers sadly into my ear, "You are going to die." I could sense that she meant soon. I'm not sure if she meant literal death or dying in some sort of metaphorical sense. And then she dissipated. My first reaction when she said it was an immediate acceptance of it as truth and fear. I thought, she's right. I know this is a creepy experience, but she didn't give off an evil vibe. She gave off a loving vibe, actually. The word mother comes to mind. I could tell that she cared about me and was worried about me. Maybe she was trying to warn me of something to come. Obviously, I'm still alive, so I'm not really sure what to make of it. My Nana died on the 16th of April, 2012. I was only 12, but we had an extremely strong bond. After a 15-year battle with cancer, she passed away. She was a very strong, stubborn, but kind woman. I didn't really get any signs of my Nana being around other than the odd butterfly landing on me or certain birds in my garden landing right next to me. But fast forward to the 17th of April, 2017. I was feeling extremely down and missing my Nana so much. I was quite sick and feeling very poorly, but I have stomach problems often, so I didn't think anything of it. That was until I had this intense feeling that I should take a pregnancy test. I don't know why, but I literally felt like I was being told to do it. And I was pregnant. I couldn't believe it. I really think my Nana had something to do with it. Fast forward to my gender scan. My partner and I were sitting in the room while a nurse did an ultrasound. As soon as we found out I was having a boy, the bin in the room suddenly opened and closed, startling all of us. We were nowhere near it. My family and I always used to joke about how my Nana cleaned everything up no matter where she was. So I really believe it was her saying, "Hey, I'm here and I'm happy for you." Since then, not much has happened, until the other day. She came to me in a dream. It wasn't sad or scary. We were in the local supermarket and I saw my Nana in the frozen aisle. I ran up to her saying, "Nana," and hugged her. It felt so incredibly real. I remember the feeling of her arms around me and the smell of her clothing. I woke up thinking I was going to be mad, but now I think she really did visit me. This happened a while ago, when I was about 16 or 17. I'd been living with my eldest sister as a sort of live-in babysitter for my 3 nephews at the time, and my room was in the unfinished basement. Sort of just a big area rug on the floor, a dresser, bed, and television. The usual. I was down there reading or something one day when I heard my sister's voice, as clear as day, call down to me, "Hey, come upstairs." Having no reason to think anything of it, I rolled off my bed and made my way toward the stairs. I got about halfway up when a feeling of absolute terror hit me. My hairs stood on end. My skin crawled. It was the middle of the day. The sun was shining brightly through the many windows of the entryway that sits atop the open stairs. I try and shake it off, wondering what in the world is going on. I get to the top, and the feeling only gets worse. I call out my sister's name, realizing something quickly. It's silent in the house. Anybody with any number of young kids, especially 3 boys all under 10, knows that that does not happen. There's a little carpeted set of steps that lead to the always open French doors of the main house. I don't see anyone inside, and as soon as I take a step toward them, my heart leapt into my throat. I have never been afraid of anything like I was in that moment. On a whim, I walked away to check the attached garage for her car. I had just opened the door when I heard her voice say again, "Come in here." I glanced into the garage and saw that her car wasn't there. I was home alone. I didn't waste any time. I raced down the basement steps, grabbed my car keys, and noped out of there. It's been 10 years and I still don't know what happened. I told my friends and family and I got a few, "You just scared yourself, silly girl," and "You must have imagined it." But I don't think so. I'd been living out there for months by that time. I'd been alone dozens of times, and nothing like that had ever happened before. My squad that I volunteer with is fairly busy, usually running around 5,000 calls a year as EMTs, so we're pretty well rounded on seeing some pretty messed up calls, and run-of-the-mill ones. It was my night to do an overnight shift with my partner. We usually like to get there early to give the day crew who's been running their butts off all day a bit of a break. We arrived at the building to find that the ambulance was still on a run, so we set up all of our stuff and waited for the crew to get back. About 10 minutes later, the crew returned, looking like they had just finished bawling their eyes out. We asked them what was wrong, and the crew chief said they just finished up CPR involving an 18-year-old girl who was pronounced at the hospital. I saw that they were pretty torn up about it, so we told them that we would finish up the last 30 minutes of their shift. Fast forward to about 2 a.m., my partner and I were hanging out and watching some movies, waiting for our next call, when we heard a girl laughing coming from the ambulance bay. My partner and I brushed it off as one of our EMT thirds gossiping on their phones with a friend, but then we realized that only we had signed up for this shift. So my partner and I went to go investigate the noise. As we got closer to the door that led to the intube bay, the laughs started getting louder. By this point, we were both pretty petrified, but we still wanted to know what the fuck was going on. So we went out into the bays and found the noise coming from the back of the ambulance, and both the back doors open. My partner and I peeked around, and we both saw a translucent girl, about 18 years old, sitting on the cot. My partner and I were both paralyzed with fear. The girl looked up, pointed at us, and said, "Bye," and then disappeared. We didn't sleep that night, and I will never do a night shift again. I live in a house that was built by my grandfather. It's pretty big. 3 garages, 6 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, 2 living rooms, and 2 kitchens. But the room that I'm focusing on for this story is my room. When I was younger, maybe 7 to 9, I woke up to a man in my closet. I closed my eyes and he was gone. A couple days later, I woke up to pitch black, probably 2 to 3 in the morning. But I felt panic in my heart. I started to rush and I felt like I wasn't alone. And when I ran to turn on the light, I couldn't touch it. Generally, I can always navigate in the dark. My mom ran into my room and saw me crying on the floor. Nothing happened for a couple of years, so let's skip to age 12. I always felt someone with me. Not necessarily something evil, just like someone watching me. At least once a day, my door would open and close like someone was entering. My friends and I wanted to investigate, so we set up an iPad in my room and FaceTimed with my phone around midnight. My door opened and my chair moved like someone had sat down. Two pencils fell off my desk and then my bed creaked. Nobody was home other than another friend, but they weren't in my room. When I was 14, a couple of nights ago, I heard my bath running. I naturally thought it was my sister, so I thought, whatever. I felt sick, so I went to my mother's room, who wasn't home at the moment. The bath emptied, and I heard my sister knock on the door and saying, "Why did you run 2 baths?" My response was sarcastically, "Maybe the ghost did it." My sister freaked out. One thing that's been happening throughout this experience is that whenever I look down the stairs into our entrance, I feel major panic. I feel sick and in danger. I have no idea what this could be. When I was 11, in 2001, my grandparents moved from Florida to Tennessee to be closer to my father, as they were approaching 80, and my grandfather had been having heart problems. My parents have 5 acres and ended up placing a mobile home on their property for my grandparents to live in. I'm assuming they shared our mailing address, but they had their own phone number. About a year after moving, my grandfather had a stroke while walking down his stairs on the front porch. The ambulance was called and he went to the hospital, but he died about a week later. My grandmother was a very brittle diabetic, and my grandfather took care of her. She lived almost another year after he died. A few months later, in the middle of the night, there's a knock at the front door. My bedroom is right next to the living room, so I immediately woke up. I run to my parents' room and tell them that someone is at the door. My dad answers the door, and it's a police officer responding to a 911 call. They had received 2 calls and hang-ups from my grandparents' telephone number. The trailer wasn't even on our property anymore, and the utility lines had all been disconnected months before. My dad explained this to the officer and he left. It happened again, not even a week later. And then, it never happened again. I suppose it's kind of a simple story, but damn, it's always scared the hell out of me. This happened a few years ago. I was still living at my mom's house, and I was up late, as per the usual. I was hanging out on the living room couch, trying to find something to watch, but oddly the cable wasn't working. I eventually fell asleep, but then I suddenly woke up to static white noise on the television, and under the living room light and fan was a big old lumberjack, looking super scared to see me looking at him. I screamed and ran toward him and turned on the light, and he was gone. I'll never forget the look of shock and surprise that the ghost of the lumberjack had of seeing me. It was like I was seeing something that I wasn't supposed to. I'm not sure if this is a dream or a residual haunting of some kind, because I'm woken out of a sleep in almost all of these experiences. This seems to have become a thing over the last year. I wake up in the middle of the night, and normally I am facing the open window. At least once a month, I'll see a shadow outside, or sometimes hear a voice associated with it, asking to be let in. I normally tell it to kick rocks and go back to bed. I've already done a ritual to prevent unwanted or harmful entities or people from entering my home, and it has worked perfectly so far. Last night, there were 2 light entities by the bedroom door, but when I turned toward the window, there were 2 shadowy creatures. They said that I had forgotten to let them in, and in my groggy state I almost was like, okay, sounds legit, but then I realized, if they can't get in, they're not supposed to be here. I told them that if they can't break the barriers, then they're not welcome, and to stop trying to trick me in my sleep, because it doesn't work. I rolled over and passed out again. It still happens a lot now. I'm not sure what to call this kind of experience, but I don't know what's going on. This urban legend concerns the area of Morosi and is well known to the locals. It is claimed that in the cemetery of Morosi there is the ghost of a girl with blonde hair and a white dress that seems to have been lost. As soon as you get close to her and you look at her face, you realize that her eyes look like glass. I will tell you what I know. This particular ghost seems to frequently appear outside the cemetery, but there are also testimonies of the girl appearing in the wider area of Morosi. There is an old rumor that whoever sees it with glass eyes has a pure soul, while anyone who sees it with blood dripping from her eyes has an unclean soul. Most of the witnesses of this ghost are taxi drivers passing through outside the cemetery. They are talking about a little girl who is looking in another direction, but as soon as the vehicle approaches her close enough, she turns to them with her innocent eyes and throws them a look that freezes their blood. There is also the testimony of a taxi driver who often spends the night outside the cemetery and once saw the girl running through the closed gate and disappearing into thin air. This legend has prompted the interest of many researchers of the paranormal who seek to find out whether there really is a small girl in the burial place that corresponds to the description of the famous ghost. It seems that in the old days there really was such a tomb. It belonged to a young girl who was killed when a car hit her and left her at the spot of the accident. Since that day, she haunts that place, and this is now the urban legend of the little girl with the glass eyes. Before my grandfather died, he gave me a small gun keyring, which I carried pretty much everywhere with me. I loved it, since it was the last thing my granddad gave me before his death. The gun was a revolver with a chamber that I could clip in so it wouldn't move, and also so you could unclip it and move it in and out. Anyway, I broke it around a month after getting it since I took it everywhere. The chamber stayed unclipped and could never be clipped back in. I was devastated, and for the first time in ages, I went to school without it in my pocket. This is the weird part. My mom, dad, aunt, uncle, and even my sister couldn't fix it. They tried as hard as they could to do it for me. As I already said, it couldn't be fixed, and I went to school without it. I came home, and instead of it being on my shelf where I left it, it was in the middle of my bed. And as I picked it up, I looked at it and realized that it was clipped in. I almost started to cry, I was so happy. I ran downstairs and asked my parents who had fixed the gun, and they were surprised, as they said that no one had even been in my room as far as they knew. I was confused, because if my mom and dad hadn't fixed it, then who had? My sister couldn't have done it because she was at her boyfriend's for a week. So I don't have any other explanation except that my granddad came back and fixed it for me. "8 years ago, I lived in a house with my aunt and my 5 cousins. A normal day, I decided to go to bed early. I had school the next day. But early in the morning, there was a sound that I can only compare to a gong. I heard it very close, and immediately I was terrified. I couldn't move, and I couldn't scream. The sound was louder every time it rang out. Then, in the corner of my bed, a voice, similar to a mixture between a man and a woman, told me to pray for myself and that he was praying for me. He repeatedly said that he was praying for me, and then it ended up saying that I should pray for friends and family. And then it was only the sound of the gong that was left, and I could move again. Crying, I went in with the rest of my family, and nobody had heard a single noise. My 15-year-old cousin, who had special needs, just passed a couple of days ago. That night, I had a dream. See, she's never been able to walk or talk, but in the dream she could, and she told me that she was okay. I cried and hugged her, and she said that she's been feeling all the hugs we've given her before, and she was so sorry that she couldn't hug back until now. That same night, she came to my grandma, who was her primary caregiver, to tell her what dress she wanted to be buried in. My grandpa just passed a couple months ago, and I really believe he went first, so that she could have someone there to welcome her.